I might get rid of that banner. Oh, no, we're live now. Oh, excellent. That's good, isn't it? I'll leave the banner. No, deliberate.
We're live. The banner is good,
yeah. Oh, it's all good fun. Sixth fun. Now the thing is how many flashes will it do before we come up?
Does it do flashes? Bing.
Yeah, it's flashing now. Look, it's flashing, and then we're going to come up. Hopefully together. Any time. Yes, we're here. Hurrah! Hello and welcome to What Did They Do Before? I am Iszi Lawrence, and over on this side of me, no, this side of me, I knew that, is the wonderful Caroline Lawrence. There you go, there she is. We're here to tell you what the people in the past did before forks, because forks are something that we all eat with, unless you're in like a Wagamama's or something, you want to show off your chopstick skills. But there's loads of people, it's not like people in the past outside of Asia used chopsticks, is it? So what did they use before they used forks? Over to my colleague, Caroline Lawrence.
Well, look here, I've got some lovely spaghetti. And I'm in ancient Roman mode today. I'm doing some research, and I thought, what did the Romans do? How did they eat spaghetti? Because they only have a little spoon like this. The Romans did
like
not.
That's yes. Tiny.
And look, it's tiny, and it's got a little tiny. You can see the spoon is not very. The spoon part is not very big. And then on this side, of course, is the little pokey bit that you can poke things with. This could be used for snails, but I'm gonna have trouble.
Go and eat it. See what.
I'm gonna stay on, Izzy.
This is historical education right here. This is where it's at.
I could.
Have you just eaten tomato paste, cold tomato paste, cold pasta there, Caroline? Is that what we're doing?
Warm pasta and a little ragu from the other night that my husband's a great cook. So, okay, trick question. The Romans did not eat spaghetti. Everybody knows that. But you might not have known that the Romans did not have forks. And in fact, Romans and Greeks didn't have forks for eating, not like this kind of fork. This type of cutlery fork wasn't invented, they think, until scholars think it didn't come to Europe, although they had maybe like a two-tined fork for serving meat, but for eating with, they didn't think it arrived in Europe till about the 11th century in Italy to eat pasta. So actually, pasta and forks, at least in Europe, are linked. So, well, what did they do before? Well, they had big forks, Izzy, and I want my first slide, please.
Okay.
The big forks they used were, of course, the Gladiator Tridents. And here's one of my books. And this guy, of course, he's the Retiarius. He's the fishman because he's based on a fisherman. And the original use of a trident, a big long pitchfork thing with 2 or 3 three little dents, teeth, is to get the fish, who are very slippery and slithery. So you start up with a fisherman used a trident, and then they modeled a gladiator on him, and he's got a big ass fork, which is they're really about
a net.
The only time, and he's got a net, of course, too. But we don't need a net. Although I might need a net when I eat my spaghetti at the moment. But here's an interesting fact. If you can show me again. Her fork was forca, and that's what it looked like. It was like a kind of a wedge, a prop.
Okay.
It's like a forked branch in a tree, a bit. And you could prop up things with it. You could put your sack over it and go on, seek your fortune with it. You could do other things. But here's
herd animals with it.
You could herd animals with it. Criminals were often tied to a big forca and paraded around the amphitheater, as actually a scene in my book, The Gladiators from Capua illustrates. And they're called forky fair. A forky fair is a great Latin word for scoundrel, which you will learn in the Cambridge Latin course. Anyone who's done the Cambridge Latin course, forky fair. So a forky fair is a criminal who has to wear a forca, a fork like that. So those are the two types that the Romans had. And I'll tell you about one more in a minute, but I wonder if you have any forks for me.
Well, all I know is that, because I did a lot of Tudors when I was at school.
Tudor.
And I know, well, the Tudors are awesome. I mean, look at them, as she says, going, look at them. Look how resplendent that gentleman is there. That's his Henry VIII, of course. Now, he didn't have a fork either. He had a pricker, which was literally just a stick. You used to stick things in to put it in your mouth. That's what they used. And also, when you sat down to a table, which wasn't actually a table, it was called a board because it wobbled. It was just like a set of trestles, and then you put the board on top, which is very important that you don't put your elbows on the table because then it would tip up because it wasn't held down. So still to this day, it's rude to put your elbows on the table. Also, the room where the board was in was probably the largest room, or the boardroom, where everybody would meet. Look at that.
Is that where they get the expression room and board, your room and board?
Yes, presumably it is. I would say that. I've got a picture of a pricker here. Hang on, I'll show you. There's a pricker at the top and there's a knife. The knives are as sharp as box cutters, so you don't want to put that. And then you had your spoon, which you got given at birth, so everybody, for your christening, you had your birthing spoon, but also... it was a giver, and they were known. The people who gave you your spoon was known as your spoonsters or your sponsors.
Oh,
look at that! That's where all these words come from. But yes,
see, I've got the Romans have a combined pricker and spoon.
They were much more efficient.
And of course, we talked a few weeks ago about what they did before pockets. You have your bosom, the front of your tunic. They would put the spoon down the front of their tunic with their napkin. And I see you've got a napkin there. You've got
well, this is where you obviously keep your napkins. This is where you wipe your hands and everything like this. But also, it's where the devil was. The devil is on your left shoulder. So anything bad happened on this shoulder because you've got your angel on this shoulder and the devil on this shoulder. So which is why, I don't know if you've ever seen people who throw salt and spill salt. You flick the devil in the eye with the salt. So anything bad ends up with the devil, and that's why we do it, because that's where you keep your napkin. Naturally, things go over this shoulder. So and your spoon as well, obviously, it probably wasn't a metal spoon. I mean, born with a silver spoon in your mouth means you were given a silver spoon from birth. You're very well to do. Most people's spoons would have been either made out of horn, and if you're poor, made out of wood, which is why occasionally you get a dummy prize is the wooden spoon that you still get at raffles and things. But anyway, that is a bit about what they did before the fork. They had prickers and spoons and their own knives, and they ate them in the boardroom.
And that is brilliant. That's so educational. And they had, of course, we know they had the big forks. They just didn't have the little forks. And there's another fun type of big fork that is also related to food, but not to fishing. It's related to bread and making bread. And if we have, it's called a winnowing fork. And here's a little, I drew winnowing fork, and it looked a bit like a rake. And the word winnow comes from wind. And what you would do is after you've harvested your wheat or your grain, your barley, you would thresh it on a threshing floor. You'd bash it with rocks or a sledge that has stones on the bottom, or you get an ox to tread on it. So it separates the grain from all the rest of the kind of stalky stuff, which is called chaff. And then what you do, I think we have an image, is you take a big fork and you fling the barley and the chaff up into the air. Now the barley is heavier, little grains of barley or wheat, that would fall to the ground, but the wind would blow away the chaff. And of course, the word threshing comes from thrash, and the word winnowing comes from wind. And this is something that they still do in some countries today, where they're trying to separate the grain from the chaff. And it's really fun. The word in Greek for winnowing fork is ptuon. And it's actually mentioned in the Bible a few times, in the New Testament and the Old Testament as well. In fact, the temple of God in Jerusalem was built on a threshing floor. So forks, big forks, can be quite important for food, which was, after all, one of the major concerns for people in ancient times, as it still is today, I think.
Yes, well, I think, but that isn't the only type of fork that we have, is it? I mean, because if you think about it, we also have this sort of fork, which is a tuning fork. Now, this was invented in 1711, and it was invented. Oh, I see. I've lost his name now. It's invented by John somebody, but goodness knows, I think it was John Storer. But I've lost his name because of the internet and amazingness. But anyway, he invented it in 1911. He came from a family of trumpeters and musicians. People forget how important musicians were as a sort of job that people had. I remember Caroline Herschel and her brother, who they discovered Uranus, the planet Uranus. They were astronomers, and you think these days, but they did science in their spare time, because in order to have a proper job, they had to be musicians, because that was a very good, stable job, which is completely backwards, because now we're like, oh no, we must have a career in science, and we'll do music on the side. But back then, music was really stable. Anyway, this guy, I think his name was Storer. He was a member of the Royal Society and everything else, and he was one of the first people. I think he's credited anyway with saying, hey, these trumpets that we play, how about we use them as musical instruments instead of ways of signaling to armies and, as being part of weaponry, effectively. And he invented this tuning fork, and he did it in order to tune different instruments so they're all the same pitch. Because in an orchestra, you don't want somebody to go, this is A, and somebody else to go, no, this is A, it would make it sound awful. So you have to have everybody in the same universal pitch, as it were. And before the tuning fork, what did they do? How did they get this pitch? Well, one man was Robert Hooke. He invented a machine which was basically rubbing brass. He had a spinning brass disc, and he used to rub against it, and however fast the disc span was what was the note, and he could get a pitch that way. He's very into frequencies. He used to tell you how exactly. Sorry?
Sounds very complicated.
It was very complicated, but he was obsessed with frequency, and he said he could tell how fast a fly's wings was beating by the sound it made. That was his big thing. But he was, we're getting into the 18th century was full of and 17th century were full of men who were like Royal Society. It's the evolution of the Enlightenment. Anyway. But before then, what people did, and what a lot of orchestras still do, is they use church organs. So each church organ plays an A, and all the instruments tune up to that note, which does mean that throughout the world, everybody's slightly a different pitch, and there is no universal understanding of what A is. And different orchestras will go, no, it's this church, no, it's this cathedral, it's this A. And so as a result, and as well, it changes through time. I was reading on a bagpipe forum. A bagpipe? Because that's the sort of thing I do. Yeah, no. Apparently bagpipes have changed in pitch over the last 30 years, because people have got bagpipes which were made in the 1960s, which they can't tune to modern bagpipes. Simply because the modern bagpipes are tuned up to a particular sound that they want to get along with. So once you've finished your mouthful of spaghetti, know that. Isn't that cool?
I didn't even know.
Oh yeah, John Shaw. Sorry, I've had Janet Reels come in, and she says it's John Shaw, and the invention of the tuning fork is generally credited to the British Museum, John Shaw, in 1711. I was right about the year. I just got his name wasn't Story, it was Shaw.
Thank you, Janet.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm so glad they invented forks, because I love my pasta. And by the way, this fork, just a little bit of trivia. My husband and I got married. Oh, do that again. That's not a tuning fork. My husband and I got married about 20 years ago, and we asked for the Stonehenge range of forks.
Ooh.
And it's so cool. It's got a hole at one end, and it's made of stainless steel or something. It's so cool. It'll outlive us by many, many decades. But anyway, they used these forks on Star Trek: The Next Generation. My husband and I were watching an episode of that, and we gave a squeal of delight as Riker or somebody pulls out a fork and starts to eat our fork. I'm so excited.
He gets on a chair very strangely, that man. Maybe it's to do with your forks. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Do leave us a like, a share, a subscribe. If you have any questions that you want answered and you don't have the internet like Janet Reel does, then please do message us and say everything, and just let us know what your question might be, and we could get to it in a future episode. Other than that, be thankful for your fork, and also think about this. Are you American? Do you use your fork like this, or are you proper and English and use your fork like this? Think about that. We'll see you next week.